From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Cheung, and this matters.
You won't be a boy forever, and winter is coming.
Oh yeah, winter's coming all right. And we've had good practice facing the elements this year, especially after a summer and a balmy fall spent outside. We all picked up new hobbies. We rode our bikes, we hiked the trails, we hung out in city parks with our friends. And if you lucked out and got a camping space this year, you know that thing was as good as finding a parking spot at a mall 2 days before Christmas. Doing things outside this year wasn't so much about wanting to, but that it's the right thing to do, following the advice of public health scientists and doctors. And we were better off and safer for it. But now, the chill is setting in. Being outside in Canada, with the wind howling and the snow cutting into your face, is not really a great time. We're staring down a long, dark, and lonely winter. Or are we? Well, it really depends on how you look at it. Can Toronto embrace its winters the way Montreal, Winnipeg, and other Canadian cities do? Our producer and audio mixer, Sean Pattenden, he loves the winter.
A lot of people don't like winter, but I love the winter. It's one of those things you get away. I prefer being with friends, but I'll go by myself and I'll listen to podcasts, listen to music, and just reflect on the day.
Long before COVID, Sean would bravely sit on a frozen lake, waiting for hours to catch some fish.
It's like a getaway. I know it sounds boring to people who don't like it or understand it, but it's like a getaway, like anything else. Like whatever activity you like to do, it's just that. You just get to go out, be on your own, and it's perfect for the times now.
So why ice fishing, man? You know you can do this in the summertime when it's beautiful out on a lake, right? Like, what are you doing?
Okay, so there's a multi-part answer. My dad took me fishing really young, so I've had a love for fishing since I was a kid. So with ice fishing, if you're a boatless angler, you can go anywhere you want on the lake, essentially.
And he does have a lot of important experience in how to stay warm in the cold.
It's easier to stay warm than it is to stay cool. The key thing is layering. You have your base layer and then sweatpants or long johns over that. I'm usually about 4 layers of pants and about 3 or 4 layers of shirts. Make sure you have enough, whatever you're fueling your fire or your heat source with. The biggest thing I would think when it comes to the cold with any, I would say winter sports, whether you're playing hockey outdoors, ice fishing, snowboarding, snowmobiling, it's the wind. The wind is the killer. You know, it can be minus 25 and no wind and it's great. You can literally go all day without even turning your heater on.
Each of us will have to prepare and dress properly to ride out this winter, spending more time outside. But there are also bigger questions at work here too, on how Toronto and other parts of the GTA meets this moment. How should we remake Toronto? How to winterize it? A city that shines in winter, a place to actually take advantage of winter rather than just tolerate it. Shawn Micallef has some ideas about that. He often goes cross-country skiing in the winter in the city right after a snowfall.
When the snow falls, it's actually kind of magical. Winter is miserable if it's wet and raining and slushy. Like that part nobody likes when it's dirty. When the snow is actually falling and the snow is clean and good, you can do so much more. It's like it opens up the city.
Micallef is an urbanist and a columnist on city affairs and politics for the Toronto Star. And we talked about how Toronto can finally embrace its winter roots and remake this city for the cold and frosty months that are still ahead of us. Sean, thanks for joining us on the podcast again.
Good to see you again.
What have you discovered about Toronto, seeing it in a different light, in different conditions, usually when no one's around?
It's really beautiful. When you're skiing in the ravines, especially in the winter, the leaves are off the trees, so you can really see the contours of the topography. Toronto has this kind of idea that it's a flat city, but it's not. And you really see that when you're in the ravines. And in the winter, when the foliage is gone, you can really see all the ripples of the landscape, which is kind of amazing. But also, if you're, a real estate voyeur, you can see the backyards of all the houses and the fancy or not always that fancy houses that are perched on the edges of the ravines. So you can do a bit of rich people voyeurism.
Yeah, a bit of gawking. Yeah,
which is kind of fun. The backyards of people's houses are really interesting. People put the front facade on sometimes. They're a little more honest in the backyards, which you can see in the winter. But after a snowfall, when you're out there, the city's really silent, right? Because the snow muffles the sound. The cacophony of city life and jackhammers and construction are getting to you. Go for a walk. in a park or a ravine after a snowfall, because it's like being almost in one of those, the science center used to have this room that was covered in foam or something that would suck up all the sound. It's kind of like that. It's like this, your voice doesn't echo. And it's kind of an amazing environment to be in.
Everyone in Toronto is facing that scenario this winter. We're all rethinking how to live a life mostly outdoors if we want to do activities safely and within the public health guidance. And the city has announced Winter TO to meet this moment of a COVID winter. What is Winter TO?
Winter TO is the latest version of what in the summer was called active TO. TO is the suffix of the year for all initiatives in Toronto. In the summer, Lakeshore was closed. Different parts of Lakeshore was closed to allow people to spread out. And that was really successful. Thousands and thousands of people using it. Things like High Park being closed to traffic. And this is an attempt, and I must commend the city for getting ahead of it, announcing it now, a month before, official winter starts, that they're going to try to give people the kind of nudge they need to kind of get outside safely. So there's things like 23 toboggan hills are going to be opened. Toronto's had a weird relationship with tobogganing because we've often go to Christie Pitts, there's signs that say do not toboggan here. And I think in some places barriers were even put up. So this year the city's kind of flipping that. I don't know, maybe they've just put the lawyers in a closet or something, but we're encouraging people to toboggan. And the golf courses, city golf courses, we have 5 city-owned golf courses around. Those are going to be open in the winter. And snowshoeing and ski loops and walking loops, I guess, are going to be created. And a bunch of other things to kind of encourage people to get out. And some things that should have been done a long time ago, I think it's 60 kilometers of new trails and pathways are going to be maintained in the winter. So I guess plowed, so you can go for an easier walk down there. We should have been doing some of this stuff a long time ago.
So this isn't that dissimilar to how the city built bike lanes or opened up the lakeshore and sidewalk cafes and patios. It's a different version of that, essentially, for the winter.
Yeah, and especially something about announcing toboggan hills, because the city's been a bit reticent about that. It's like, it is the winter version of scratching your head going, is this Toronto? We can make patios, we can make bike lanes just like that, and the sky does not fall, and there's not an endless argument at City Hall about it. So it's like that pandemic urgency has kind of spread to the winter, and that's a good thing. And I wonder, it'll be interesting to watch because, despite winter not being that bad here compared to other Canadian cities, it doesn't snow that much. As an urban skier, you're waiting for it. It's like, oh, I haven't done this in 3 weeks and it's February. It'll be interesting to see if some of this, by necessity, because we need to get out to be out of our rooms, if this is the year that it kind of changes the relationship Toronto has with winter. You go to Montreal or Winnipeg or Edmonton, they have a much different relationship with winter, right? They don't hibernate. I always think of Montreal's Nuit Blanche. Ours is usually at the end of September. Some people complain it's too cold then because it might go down to 7 or something. Montreal does their Nuit Blanche in February.
Yeah, in the dead of winter, in a Montreal winter, which is very different.
Right. I think we might be nudged into the Canadian mythology that we seem to reject, whether that mythology is real or not,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, because it struck me how quickly many of us adapted in the summer because we had to, of using these public spaces that maybe we took for granted before. I definitely went to more parks and went for longer hikes than I used to. Do you think that Torontonians will see our city differently, the winter differently, because we have to?
Yeah, I hope so. Even seeing people in the summer using their porches, right? Porch meetings, distance. Nobody uses porches and balconies in Toronto. And this year they kind of did. It's like discovering this open space. The last few weeks, we've seen the closure of the patios, right? Which is a bit worrying for local businesses, of course. And those patios that are still going to be open, it's really cold. Most people are not going to sit still on a patio, but people are going to miss that social thing. And I would recommend maybe making a date with a few friends, depending on what level we're at in safety precautions, and go for a mobile patio walk. Moving, you stay warm and you can still have that social thing, bring a secret beverage of your choice if you want, keep it on the down low. The city's opened up a lot more washrooms this winter, which is really important to making it accessible to people for getting more than 10 minutes away from your house. So I think that maybe not thinking you have to get cross-country skis to go out, because not everyone's going to go do that, but maybe keeping it social. What social things can I do with the people I love and miss and do them outside? Just if you want to have a snack and a drink, just do it while you're walking. It'll be different than sitting at a patio with a pint or coffee.
We'll be right back. For a second, actually, I feel like I can hear people rolling their eyes, people who don't live in Toronto, of us talking about our winters ahead. And I just want to say, having lived in the prairies, it is true what they say here that there is a wet cold here. So it does get in your bones. But do you think that there is a way that Toronto can or should winterize itself, maybe for the long term? Active TO is one way to do that in the immediate sphere. But is there a way you think Toronto should embrace more of that idea that this can be a winter city, that we can still do things in the winter?
Yeah, this is definitely a good start. The washrooms are a good start. People have to go to the washroom in the winter as much as the summer if they're going to be outside. There's other things we could do. Like 2 weeks ago, the Infrastructure Committee of City Council voted not to plow sidewalks downtown. If you live in Scarborough or Etobicoke, some of the more formerly suburban parts, but definitely part of the city now, a little tractor will come along and plow your sidewalk as well. In Etobicoke, in places, the snowplow will actually plow the front of your driveway, which is kind of amazing. It's a service level that the older part of the city, the more central part of the city, doesn't have. And the city, in its infinitely cheap way, decided not to do it again this year. And I think that's a big problem, because we all should be going out in front of wherever we live if we're able and shoveling. It's a civic duty, but we know not everybody does that, right? And the moment one loop of a chain, once one property doesn't properly shovel the snow, that makes that street inaccessible to anybody with a mobility problem. So I think literally leveling that playing field and making it actually accessible to people of all mobility levels.
Yeah, it's an equity thing. Yeah,
we'll open it up. Not everyone can leap over that slushy puddle that's at every corner, right? But if there was a way to clear that, that would open up the city. I think that's why a lot of people will stay in, because they don't want to climb over, lumps of snow and go through that slush, because Toronto's been negligent in maintaining these winter spaces. And if we did it properly, maybe like some other cities do, it would sort of erase that mental, physical barrier that people have to going out. So the fun side of it is this winter TO plan, but there's also, we have to maintain the stuff that we have side of it.
Shawn, you're an urbanist, so you really pay attention to how cities are built and the things that people embrace. Can you think of any cities that have really leaned into an example of doing winter right? You mentioned Winnipeg, and of course, that's a city that seems to really embrace the winter and has activities outside. Can you think of any cities here in Canada, maybe abroad, that seems to get that part of winter?
Yeah, you think in Quebec City, they have the Winter Festival with Bonhomme, the big snowman, right? So having a winter festival is exciting. Toronto's kind of getting there. We have the winter stations out in the beaches area where those design projects kind of take over the lifeguard stations. And that's been really popular. You'll go out on a Sunday and there'll be hundreds of people walking in the sub-zero. But I just saw this week that Calgary announced that they are going to put out fire pits with free firewood in city parks. And I think that's a great idea. We have a few fire pits right now in parks that you can reserve. And I think you have to pay a fee. Maybe it's $50, but you can check that on your own on the city's website. And they do get used, but there's hardly any of them. And we're seeing in the daily news conferences, the fire chief says, and last night we put out 10 bonfires, right, along the beaches and in the parks. So obviously there's a desire to make a fire. It's very elemental, I guess, as human beings. And so the city of Calgary is kind of getting ahead of it and just putting out the fire pits. It feels un-Torontonian to supply the firewood. We're too cheap. But if Calgary can do it, we can do it. And so that's like that.
Why not?
That's a simple thing, right? People are really attracted to fire. It's social. It's safe. You could cook a marshmallow or whatever people do, a s'more. And the attraction of having a fire there, I think would get over the hump of, I have to go outside in the snow, it's going to be cold. But no, if there's a fire, if there's something warm and cozy to get to, it seems simple, but you kind of need to leave some breadcrumbs out to kind of nudge people out of what they know.
There have been so many ideas that have been long in the making that have come to life this year. I'm thinking about bike lanes and where to put them. For years, that was an endless fight at City Hall, and we did it. In a matter of months, it was done as people were being outside. Shutting down some streets for pedestrians or cyclists, opening up sidewalk cafes to use our public spaces better. Do you think whatever changes we make this winter will last in the same way in Toronto?
Yeah, it depends if people like them, right? And I feel like the city streets looked so beautiful downtown when the outdoor cafes were open and at their peak in August and September. Each restaurant did their own like decorations, and they had put out potted plants, especially the Danforth, because they got the new bike lanes. But then they had all the temporary patios out on the street. And the Danforth, in my mind, it was just such a hot, desolate concrete space. It's about 6 lanes wide and the wide sidewalks, not that many street trees. And then once the patios were there, it just was suddenly green because all these restaurants put out green stuff. And then like when I saw that, once that was going halfway through summer or so, there's no going back. Why would anybody not want it to be like this? So I think once people get the taste of it, it'll happen again. Though, again, the minor cynical voice in the back of my head, because I've lived here for 20 years now. If you like something, you might need to make your position known, right? Toronto often runs on complaints. The squeaky wheel which is how every city works. If you liked something, if you like those cafes, if you like the green stuff, the potted plants, if you like the bike lanes, if you like some of the winter stuff that's happening, maybe send a quick email to your counselor to balance out the complaints that kind of come in. It's easy just to like something and be quiet about it. But so I think once people see that the sky does not fall, despite what the critics said, when it actually happens, whether it's bike lanes or something else, and people realize it's a good thing, I hope a lot of this is here to stay.
Shawn, thanks for stopping by and chatting to us.
Thanks, Adrian.
And that is Shawn Micallef, urbanist and columnist for the Toronto Star. Also, special thank you to the other Shawn, our very own Sean Pattinen, This Matters producer and audio mixer, for, of course, mixing the show, as always, and for sharing some good tips on how to get through this winter. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Adrian Cheung, Saba Aitazaz, and Raju Muthar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattinen, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.